structures which are present within the abdominal cavity, the stomach, the transverse colon, and the small intestines. They are surrounded by a thin layer of the membrane, so that is known as peritoneum. And some structures which are just behind the lining of the peritoneum, they are the retroperitoneal structures, and these are the intraperitoneal structures. Okay, so today we'll discuss about the peritoneum first part. So the peritoneum is the largest serous membrane, and as we know, the serous cavity, they are lining the cavity of the body wall during the development, since the development of the embryo, and in the form of closed sac, which is invaginated by the number of the viscera. So this is the peritoneum, which is invaginated by the different viscera, and they are surrounded by it. Therefore, the peritoneum has the two layers. They are the parietal layer or the outer layer, and the visceral layer or the inner layer. So here we can see the parietal layer, which lines the abdominal cavity, the outer lining of the peritoneal cavity. So this is the parietal layer. And here we can see the visceral layer, which are surrounding the viscera or the abdominal organs. So this is the visceral layer. So the layers which is intimately adherent to the abdominal organ is the visceral layer, and the outer layer or the lining of the abdominal wall is the parietal layer. So within these two layers, here we can see a potential space. That space is known as peritoneal cavity. So this is the visceral layers around the viscera of the abdomen, and this is the parietal layer or the outer layer. The parietal layer lines the abdominal and the pelvic cavity. So this is the abdominal cavity, whereas this one is the pelvic cavity. So the parietal layer, it lines the abdominal and the pelvic cavity, and the visceral layer reflected over the viscera to cover them partially or completely. Okay, so the stomach, which is completely surrounded by the visceral layer. Here we can see the stomach, and this is the liver. Okay, and this one is the transverse colon. Again, this one is the small intestine. So they all are completely surrounded by the visceral layer, and they are known as intraperitoneal organ. Whereas here we can see the pancreas, which is surrounded in front only, that is known as the retroperitoneal structures. Similarly, the second part and third part and fourth part of the duodenum, also the retroperitoneal structure, as we discussed before. Okay, so the parietal layer, it lines the abdominal and the pelvic cavity. So this is the abdominal cavity, and this one is the pelvic cavity. And the visceral layer, it reflected over the viscera to cover them partially or completely to make the organ intraperitoneal or the retroperitoneal. And the visceral and the parietal layers are separated by the potential space called the peritoneal cavity. So this cavity is the potential space is known as peritoneal cavity, which is bounded by the visceral layer and the parietal layer. So the peritoneal cavity is the largest cavity in the body and filled with thin film of serous fluid that is secreted by the mesothelial cells. As we know, the mesothelial cells, they are lined by the simple squamous epithelium, and the secretion is known as peritoneal fluid. So this is the peritoneal fluid which is occupied within the peritoneal cavity, and it is around 5 to 20 ml. It may be up to 50 ml, it depends on the individual. And the peritoneal fluid consists of water and the electrolyte. And this fluid performs the lubricating function and allows free movement of one peritoneal surface over another, so that the free movement of the potential this potential space or the peritoneal surface can occur. So this is the peritoneal fluid. It may be up to 50 ml. Are you getting?
Yes, ma'am.
Rosen, are you there? Rosen, Prince, are you there? Prince, are you there?
Ma'am.
Do you have any queries?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So as we know, the peritoneal cavity in case of male is closed sac, whereas in female, the cavity forms an open sac, and it communicates with the exterior through the pelvic ostia of the uterine tubes. We'll discuss about the female reproductive tract later on, but the uterine tube or the fallopian tube, which has the fimbriated end on the lateral aspect, and it has the opening to grasp the ova from the ovary, so that the pelvic ostia is communicating the external surface in case of female, but in case of male, no such structure is there, so that in male the peritoneal cavity is closed sac, whereas in case of female it is the open sac. And the peritoneal cavity is divided into two parts. They are the greater sac and the lesser sac. So this is the greater sac, the larger one. So this is the greater sac, and just behind the stomach is the lesser sac. So this is the greater sac, whereas this one is the lesser sac. Here we can see the stomach. Just behind the stomach is the lesser sac, and in front is the greater sac. So the greater sac is the main compartment and extends from the diaphragm down into the pelvis. So from the diaphragm to the pelvis is the extension of the greater sac or the greater cavity. And the lesser sac is the smaller and lies behind the stomach and the lesser omentum and liver. So just behind the liver, lesser omentum and the stomach, here we can see a small cavity that is known as lesser sac. So the total peritoneal cavity is divided into greater sac, the larger one, and the smaller sac or the lesser sac. So this is the greater sac, and this one is the lesser sac. So this is the greater sac in front, and just behind the stomach and the liver is the lesser sac. So the lesser sac, it provides the space for the dilatation or the distension of the stomach when it is full. Talking about the peritoneal fold, many abdominal organs are suspended by the folds of peritoneum, and such organs are mobile. For example, the mesentery, it holds the small intestine, so that small intestine is mobile. Okay, so they are the fold of the peritoneum. Example is the mesentery, megacolon. Okay, the other organs rest directly on the posterior abdominal wall and may be covered by the peritoneum on one side and are fixed or immobile. So these structures or the organ is known as retroperitoneum. For example, the majority part of the duodenum, second part, third part, and fourth part, the pancreas, okay, and again the kidney, they are the retroperitoneal structures, okay. So the organ which are present in the abdomen may be the intraperitoneal and it may be the retroperitoneal. If it is held by the fold of the peritoneum, that is the intraperitoneal. If it is only covered in the anterior aspect, that is known as the retroperitoneal. And those organs almost totally covered with the visceral peritoneum are said to be intraperitoneal. For example, stomach, jejunum, and the ileum. So jejunum and ileum, they are held with the help of the mesentery, the fold of the peritoneum, like this. Okay, so it is known as the intraperitoneal organ. And those organs which lie behind the peritoneum and only partially covered with the peritoneum, they are said to be the retroperitoneal. The example of the retroperitoneal organ are the pancreas, the ascending and the descending part of the colon. So pancreas, ascending and the descending part of the colon, they are covered only in front with the help of the fold of the peritoneum, so that they are known as the retroperitoneal structure or the retroperitoneal organ. So here we can see the retroperitoneal, the pancreas. Here we can see the fold of the peritoneum in front only, the duodenum, okay, and in some part of the rectum, the upper part of the rectum here, and the intraperitoneal organ. Here we can see the mesentery. They are holding the small intestine, okay. This mesentery, it holds the mesentery holds the small intestine, the transverse colon by the transverse major colon, and the stomach by the lesser and the greater curvature, greater sac. Okay, so they are the intraperitoneal structure, and these are the retroperitoneal, pancreas, duodenum, and some portion of the rectum. So don't be confused with the intraperitoneal structures and the retroperitoneal. So intraperitoneal, they are completely surrounded with the fold of the peritoneum, whereas the retroperitoneal, they are covering only in front with the peritoneal lining. So the peritoneal fold are given the various name, maybe the mesentery or the mesocolon. So mesentery is the fold suspending the small intestine. So here we can see the coils of the small intestine. They are held in a proper place with the help of the fold of the peritoneum that is known as the mesentery. So this is the root of the mesentery, which holds the small intestine, jejunum, and ileum in its own place. So this is the mesentery, the root of the mesentery, okay? And they are the coils of the small intestine. And maybe the major colon, the fold suspending the part of the colon. So the transverse colon, they are attached with the help of the transverse major colon. So this is also the fold of the peritoneum. So transverse major colon, and this is the mesentery. And other terminologies may be the omentum in relation to the stomach. So the plural is the omenta, the fold attached to the stomach. It may be the lesser omentum towards the lesser curvature and greater omentum towards the greater curvature. So omenta towards the attachment on the stomach. And the ligaments, in some situation, the double laid fold of the peritoneum that connect the organs to the abdominal wall or to the each other. And such folds are called the ligaments. So the ligaments may be the gastrosplenic ligaments. The fold between the stomach and the spleen is the gastrosplenic ligaments here, and the falciparum ligament, as we discussed before, in the liver, which is attached on the anterior surface of the liver in between the right and the left lobe of the liver, so falciparum ligament. So they are the different names of the fold of the peritoneum, so the ligaments, okay? So gastrosplenic ligaments, maybe the falciparum ligaments, renal ligaments, so they are the ligaments. And then they are also the fold of the peritoneum. So do you have any queries till now? Atal, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
So are you getting or not? Do you have any queries?
No, ma'am.
Yubaraz, are you there? Karuna, are you there?
Yes,
Karuna,
ma'am. Yes,
are you
ma'am.
getting? Are you getting the terminology?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. If you have any queries, you can ask. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
So move on to the greater omentum. So here we can see the largest peritoneal fold. It's hanging over on the greater curvature. So largest peritoneal fold that hangs from the greater curvature of the stomach and covers the loops of the small intestine. So it covering the intestinal part here, and it consists of four layers. So that is known as greater omentum. So greater omentum means it is the fold of the peritoneum, okay? It is the largest fold and it hangs on the greater curvature of the stomach. So this is the greater omentum. And there four layers of the greater omentum are this. So here we can see the first layer and the second layer, and they fold to form the third and the fourth layer of the greater omentum. So first, second, third, and the fourth layer. So in the pediatric life, in the embryonic life, they are the separate one, and later on they fuse together. Okay. The first and the second layers are attached to the greater curvature of the stomach. Here we can see the stomach. So first and second layers, they are attached on the greater curvature of the stomach, and the proximal 2.5 centimeter of the first part of the duodenum. In the class of the duodenum, we discuss about the intraperitoneal part. So initial 2.5 centimeter of the duodenum is the intraperitoneal, whereas the remaining part is the retroperitoneal. Okay, so the logic is here. So the initial 2.5 centimeter of the first part of the duodenum is also the intraperitoneum. So the greater curvature of the stomach and the initial 2.5 centimeter of the duodenum, there is attachment of the first and second layer of the greater sac, greater curvature, greater omentum, and they descends to a variable extent and forms the lower free margin. So this is the lower free margin of the greater omentum, and it is continuous with the posterior two layers. So first layer, it continues as the fourth layer, and the second layer, it continues as the third layer. So one, two, three, four layer of the greater omentum. So the first layer, it continues with the fourth layer. So we have to follow the first layer. So if you follow the first layer, it continues as the fourth layer here, just after folding, and the second layer continues with the third layer. So second layer, it continues as the third layer. of the greater omentum. And third and fourth layer, they pass upward and are attached to the anterior-superior surface of the transverse colon. So this is the transverse colon along the tinea omentalis. So this is the transverse colon where there is attachment of the third and fourth layer. So don't be confused. First layer, we have to follow the first layer. It continues as a fourth layer. And second layer, it continues as the third layer. And they attach on the transverse colon of the large intestine. So the content of the greater omentum between the first and second layer, there is the anastomosis of the right and the left gastroepiploic vessels and the corresponding lymph nodes close to the greater curvature. So that anastomosis we discussed while we are discussing about the arterial supply and the lymphatic drainage of the stomach. Okay, so they are the anastomosis of the right and the left gastroepiploic vessels. And between the third and second layer, second and third layer, in early life, part of the lesser sac intervenes. After puberty, it gets obliterated by the fusion of second and third layers, except about 2.5 centimeter below the greater curvature. So I discussed before in the embryonic life, it is present, but later on it is obliterated. So between third and fourth layer, blood vessels derived from the anastomosis of the right and the left gastroepiploic arteries will be there. And in addition, the greater omentum contains the fat, areolar tissue, macrophages in the form of small dense patches and is also known as milky spots. So it can be asked in MCQ. So milky spots is present in the greater omentum. So what is the function of the greater omentum? So it acts as the storehouse of the fat because if we open the abdomen for surgery, we can see the peritoneum that covers the whole of the intestinal area. So that is the only we can see the fatty layers. Okay, so that is why it acts as a storehouse of the fat and protects the peritoneal cavity against the infection because of the presence of the macrophages in it. So macrophages are responsible to engulf the microorganism and it helps to prevent the infection and wraps an inflamed organ and prevents the spread of infection. Hence, it is known as abdominal guard. So it helps to limit the infection. It helps to limit the spread of the infection by covering by the greater omentum. So that it is also termed as the abdominal police guard. So this is the greater omentum. Okay. And initially we see the rest of and it's also contained. Do you have questions? Okay. Do you understand the momentum?
Yes, ma'am.
Near there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you get it? You got
Yes,
it?
ma'am. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
So the move on to the lesser omentum. So lesser omentum is the fold of the peritoneum which is attached on the lesser curvature of the stomach. So here we can see the attachment of the lesser curvature of the stomach, that is the lesser omentum. And again, it attached to the porta hepatis, the some portion attached to the porta hepatis. So this is the lesser omentum. Lesser omentum, it connects the lesser curvature of the stomach and the proximal 2.5 centimeter of the duodenum to the liver. So here we can see the lesser curvature of the stomach, and this is the proximal 2.5 centimeter of the duodenum. So there is connection, there is attachment of the lesser omentum. Okay, and the portion of the lesser omentum between the liver and the stomach is called as hepatogastric ligament. So attachment on the stomach and the liver, that is why it is known as hepatogastric ligaments. And the portion between the liver and the duodenum, the lower one, okay, is known as hepatoduodenal ligament. So hepatogastric ligament between the stomach and the liver, and hepatoduodenal ligament between the first part of the duodenum and the liver in total is known as lesser omentum. Okay, so this is the hepatogastric ligament and this is the hepatoduodenal ligament. Both of them completely we term it as the lesser omentum. So lesser omentum attached on the lesser curvature of the stomach to the liver. And here we can see the porta hepatis. So some structures are passing to the liver. And the lesser omentum consists of two layers, has a right free margin where two layers becomes the continuous. So here, the right free margin, it becomes the continuous. So the attachment inferiorly, lesser curvature of the stomach, here we can see the inferior attachment of the lesser omentum to the lesser curvature of the stomach, and the upper border of the proximal 2.5 centimeter of the duodenum. So inferior attachment, lesser curvature of the stomach to the first part, initial 2.5 centimeter of the duodenum, and superiorly attached to the liver. Okay, so here we can see the superior attachment of the lesser omentum. The superior attachment, the attached to the liver, the attachment is in the form of L-shaped structure, and the vertical limb of the L attached to the fissure for the ligamentum venosum, and the horizontal limb is attached to the porta hepatis. Okay, so this is the vertical limb, and this one is the horizontal limb, which attached to the porta hepatis. So here we can appreciate the porta hepatis. Okay, so vertical limb and horizontal limb. So that is the superior attachment of the lesser omentum. So what are the contents of the lesser sac or lesser omentum? So close to the lesser curvature, anastomosis of the right and the left gastric artery, they are the branches from the celiac trunk, and the gastric group of the lymph nodes and the lymphatics are there, and the branches of the gastric nerve are there. So within the right free margin, within the porta hepatis, the structures present are the portal vein, bile duct, hepatic artery proper, hepatic plexus of the nerves, lymph nodes, and the lymphatics. So in short, we say it as the DAV. So bile duct, duct A, artery, hepatic artery, V is the portal vein. So these three are very important structure passing through the right free margin at the same time the porta hepatis. We discussed in liver also. So they are the structures which passes through the right free margin of the lesser omentum. And the next fold here is the mesentery. So here we can see the fold of the peritoneum that holds the small intestine. Okay, so this is the root of the mesentery. It suspends the coils of the jejunum and ileum from the posterior abdominal wall. So here we can see the posterior abdominal wall. Okay, and this is the free border which are holding this jejunum and ileum, and presents the two borders. They are the vertebral border or the root, and the intestinal or the free border. So this is the vertebral border or the roots, which is attached to the posterior abdominal wall, and the free border is this, which are holding the small intestine in its own place. So the root of mesentery is important for exam purpose. Talking about the root of the mesentery, is about 15 centimeter long. So is this, it is obliquely placed, okay, and extending from the left side of L2 vertebra at the duodenojejunal flexure to the right side in the sacroiliac joint at the ileocecal junction. So this is obliquely placed, 15 centimeter long, and extending from L2 vertebra, left side of the L2 vertebra to the sacroiliac joint like this. And structure crossed by the root of the mesentery, very important for gross. So from above downwards, they are the third part of the duodenum. So here we can see the C-shaped curvature of the duodenum. So first is the third part of the duodenum, and posteriorly abdominal wall, in the posterior aspect, posterior abdominal wall, the inferior vena cava, the right gonadal vessels, and right ureter, right psoas major muscles, the muscles which are present in the posterior abdominal wall over here, right genitofemoral nerve, and the right sacroiliac joint here in the ileocecal junction area. So the root of mesentery is obliquely placed and extending from L2 vertebra, left side of the L2 vertebra, to the sacroiliac joint, and it crosses the different structures which are present in the posterior abdominal wall. So especially the third part of the duodenum, retroperitoneal structure, abdominal aorta, inferior vena cava, right gonadal vessels, right ureter, right psoas major muscles, right genitofemoral nerve and the right sacroiliac joint. So they are the structure crossed by the root of mesentery. So you have to mention it in sequence. So the free border is about 6 meters long and separates to enclose the jejunum and ileum. So it encloses the jejunum and ileum. So major part of the small intestine, they are enclosed by the mesentery. And the contents of the mesentery are the jejunum and ileum, the major content, jejunal and ileal branches of the superior mesenteric vessels, plexus of the nerves around the blood and around the blood vessels, intestinal lymphatics known as lacteals and the mesenteric lymph nodes and the fat. So they are the content of the mesentery. So major content, main content is the jejunum and ileum and the branches of the superior mesenteric vessels which supply to the jejunum and ileum, plexus of the nerves, intestinal lymphatics and the fat. So the next fold of the peritoneum is the mesoappendix. So do you have any queries till now? Shreya, are you there? Shreya?
Yes, ma'am.
So are you getting the messaging? You understand
Yes,
the
ma'am.
messaging? Okay. And Roshan, are you there? So the root of the mesentery and its structure crossed by it is important for exam. Okay. So move on to the mesoappendix. Mesoappendix is the fold of the peritoneum which holds the appendix in its own place. So here we can see the mesoappendix and this one is the appendix. So it holds the appendix in its own place. Okay. So the small triangular fold of the peritoneum which encloses the entire appendix. So this is the length of the appendix around 9 centimeter and entire appendix is held with the help of the it enclosed with the help of the major appendix and that is also the another fold of the peritoneum and derived from the posterior layer of the mesentery close to the ileocecal junction because the base of the appendix is in the ileocecal junction and contains the appendicular vessels, nerves, and the lymphatics. So, major appendix, the major content of the major appendix is the appendicular vessels, nerves, lymphatics, and it holds the appendix. So, that is the major appendix. And next is the transverse major colon. The peritoneal fold which holds the transverse colon in its place is the transverse major colon. So here we can see the transverse major colon. So it is the broad peritoneal fold which suspends the transverse colon from the posterior abdominal wall. So the attachment in the posterior abdominal wall of the transverse major colon here. It presents the two borders. They are the anterior border and the posterior border. So anterior border attached to the posterior surface of the transverse colon, okay, and along the tenia major-colica. Okay, so this is the anterior border of the transverse major colon. And the posterior border here, the posterior border attached to the anterior surface of the head and the anterior border of the pancreas. Here, anterior surface of the head and the anterior border of the body of the pancreas, the posterior attachment of the transverse colon. So here, from here to the in front of the pancreas is the attachment of the transverse major colon. And the contents of the transverse major colon are the transverse colon, middle colic vessels, nerves, and the lymphatics, loose areolar tissue, and the fat. So they are the content of the transverse major colon. So this is the transverse major colon. So here we can see the body of the pancreas. In front of the body of the pancreas, the anterior border, there is the attachment of the transverse major colon. And here, the anterior border attached to the transverse colon here. So this is the transverse major colon. And the next fold of the peritoneum is the sigmoid major colon. So sigmoid major colon, which holds the sigmoid colon in its own place and it suspends the sigmoid colon from the posterior wall of the pelvic cavity. So here is the posterior wall of the pelvic cavity. Here we can see the posterior wall of the pelvic cavity where there is attachment of the root of the sigmoid major colon. So the root is inverted V-shaped like this. Inverted V-shaped, and apex of the root is situated in front of the left ureter. So this is the left ureter, in front of the left ureter. Apex of the V is situated, the root of the sigmoid colon, and over the bifurcation of the left common iliac artery here. And the left limb of the root attached along the left pelvic rim up to the junction of the descending and the sigmoid colon. So descending and the sigmoid colon, the junction is here. Okay, so this is the left limb and this one is the right limb of the sigmoid major colon. And the right limb is attached to the pelvic surface of the sacrum, extending from the apex to the median plane at the level of S3 vertebra and the median plane here, S3 vertebra. Okay, so that is the attachment of the right and the left limb of the sigmoid major colon. So inverted V-shaped. This is the left limb at the junction of the descending colon and the sigmoid colon, and the right limb attached to the sacrum, S3 vertebra. And the content of the sigmoid major colon are the sigmoid colon, so S-shaped sigmoid colon here, and sigmoid and the superior rectal vessels which are supplying the sigmoid colon, lymphatics, nerves, loose areolar tissue, and the fat as in the other fold of the peritoneum. So that is the sigmoid major colon. And move on to the lesser sac. So this is the lesser sac which is situated just behind the stomach and the lesser omentum and behind the liver. So large space situated behind the stomach, the lesser omentum and the liver. So stomach, lesser omentum and the liver. This space is known as lesser sac. Acts as a bursa to allow the expansion of the stomach. So it provides the space for the distension of the stomach. Hence it is also known as omental bursa. Omenta in relation to the stomach, and closed on all the sides except at its right border where it is communicating with the greater sac through the epiploic foramen. So I'll show you later. Just below the liver, there is the epiploic foramen. And what are the boundaries of the lesser sac? Here we can see the lesser sac. So it has the anterior and the posterior wall. So anterior wall on the anterior aspect and the posterior wall on the posterior aspect of the lesser sac. And four margins are there. They are the upper margin, okay, lower margin, right, and the left margin. So in total is the lesser sac. So anterior wall is formed by the, from above downward, they are the caudate lobe of the liver. So caudate lobe of the liver, lesser omentum, stomach, and proximal 2.5 centimeter of the duodenum, and the anterior two layer of the greater omentum as we discussed before. So caudate lobe, lesser omentum, stomach, proximal 2.5 centimeter of the duodenum, and anterior two layer of the greater omentum, that is the anterior wall of the lesser sac, and posterior wall is formed by the stomach bed, the structures which are forming the stomach bed. As we discussed before about the stomach bed, then they are the left cross of the diaphragm, okay, left suprarenal gland, splenic vessels, they all are the structure which forms the stomach bed. So they form the posterior wall of the lesser sac, and all the structures are the upper layer of the transverse major colon. So here we can see the upper layer of the transverse major colon and the posterior two layer of the greater omentum. So third and fourth layer. So that is the posterior wall of the lesser sac. And the margins are upper margin formed by the reflection of the peritoneum from the diaphragm to the caudate lobe. So this is the reflection of the peritoneum from the diaphragm to the caudate lobe of the liver, and the esophagus, some portion of the esophagus. And the lower margin in newborn, it corresponds with the lower margin of the greater omentum. After puberty, the second and third layer are fused, hence the lesser sac does not usually extend below the transverse colon in the adult life. This portion they fuse together in adult life. So that is the lower margin. And the right margin, here we can see the right free margin of the greater omentum. Okay, so this is the right free margin of the greater omentum. The reflection of the peritoneum from the pancreas to the posterior surface of the duodenum here, and the epiploic foramen. So this is the right margin of the lesser sac. And the left margin is formed by the left free margin of the greater omentum, the gastroepiploic, gastrosplenic, and the lenorenal ligament, the reflection from the stomach to the spleen and to the kidney, and the gastrophrenic ligament here. So they are the posterior margin of the lesser sac. So this is the front, behind, upper margin, lower margin, right, and the left margin. And move on to the epiploic foramen. So epiploic foramen is the communication of the greater sac in front and the lesser sac behind. It's also called as the foramen of Winslow or agitus or opening to the lesser sac. Okay, so these three are the synonyms for the epiploic foramen. So this is here. Okay, and through this foramen, the greater and the lesser sac communicates with each other and presents behind the right free margin of the lesser omentum at the level of T12 vertebra. So right free margin of the lesser omentum means the surrounding of the porta hepatis in the liver. Okay, so that is the right free margin of the lesser omentum, which makes the communication of the lesser sac with the greater sac, and that is known as the epiploic foramen, which is present just below the caudate lobe of the liver in normal conditioning. So what are the boundaries of the epiploic foramen? So anteriorly, right free margin of the lesser omentum here. Posteriorly, inferior vena cava. Above is the caudate lobe of the liver. And below is the first part of the duodenum and the peritoneal floor beneath which runs the hepatic artery. Okay, so we can see here. So caudate lobe of the liver, first part of the duodenum is this. So this is the communication between the greater and the lesser sac. And below the first part and the floor fold of the peritoneum beneath which runs the hepatic artery is the hepatic artery. Okay, so this is the floor of the epiploic foramen. So that is the communication between the lesser sac with the greater sac. So do you have any queries? Sudeep, are you there? Sudeep? Someone?
Yes, ma'am.
You understand the epiploic foramen?
Hazır ma'am.
Yes, okay. So you have to know the normal anatomical position of the liver and the stomach and the duodenum so that you can understand the position of the caudate lobe and the first part of the duodenum and the pyloric end of the stomach so that we can easily appreciate the epiploic foramen. Okay, so these terminologies are very important and they are in relation to the peritoneum. So do you have any queries? Aryan, are you there? Aryan? Sonali?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any queries?
No, ma'am.
Ria, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
So you understand it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So today I discuss only about the introductory part of the peritoneum, the folds, the ligaments, the terminology, greater sac, lesser sac. Okay.